All right, so I'm going to open it up right away to all of you. So
I'm just so delighted at all the possible questions we can bring out for you and the panel. One that intrigues us quite a bit at Sustainable Aviation is the notion that the air taxi of whatever type will have like a Russian nesting dolls, and that inside it there'll be a module that is sort of like a little golf cart or one of David Calley's Planet Riders or something like that, that the vehicle will open up and emit this baby vehicle, and it'll go the last mile. Can you comment on how an urban environment would accept or welcome that or not?
let me, so we have these two great urbanists here. Have any thoughts on that?
It sounds
question?
like the Elroy, where they drop the Elroy off at school. Maybe he takes the little, okay, so I think this is exactly it, this neighborhood electric vehicle idea, which is kind of a big conversation among a lot of, when you go to these mobility summits, there's always these things that they call bicycars, or I don't know, what's some of their names? You say NEV, it's like the golf cart type idea, you know, but never electric vehicle. I'm not sure if there's other terms, but I think this is, like I said, with the dockless revolution that's happening with scooters and bikes, this is just the next level of what's going to be available. Things like cargo bikes for families, or having these little golf cart type things to help people get around. So it fits very well into my vision of how we can replace the real big cars.
Yeah, you know, I think the larger, part of that answer also is we're moving towards a future where there's a lot more information available, a lot more easily. The transaction costs from going from one mode to another, intermodalism, is now going to be much, much easier. I mean, that is, whatever you think of Uber and Lyft, they really broke through that barrier and make it very easy. So I think it's someone earlier said, keep it simple. And I think that's going to be part of that solution. Yes, right there.
Thank you all for your talks. Those were fantastic. My question is about encouraging adoption. Dan Sperling, you said everyone has a cost, and I know that that's true, but I also wonder what are the carrots instead of the sticks that we could use, whether it's on the ground or in the air, to encourage adoption of these systems. I see public policy and PR campaigns encouraging people to get on transit. Some are more effective than others. What beyond bus stop advertising can we do to get people onto these systems?
Anyone want to take? You want to take? I have lots.
Sure. Respectfully, I think that approaches it wrong. The major problem, the fundamental problem, I believe, that leads to inefficient transportation is underpricing. That is, we have a very rich vocabulary for talking about when somebody is charging us too much. We say we're gouged, or cheated, or gypped, and it becomes very emotional. We have no vocabulary for describing underpricing. You're not charging me enough. And so let me just give you a couple examples of that. How many of you would prefer paying priced parking rather than free parking for, say, when you come to an event like this? How many of you would vote in favor of eliminating free parking? Okay, you're kind of weird, aren't you? You're the exception. Most people love free parking, but there is no free parking. The choice is really between paying directly or indirectly. Now, for the last half century, transportation planning has really consisted a lot of figuring out ways to provide abundant, unpriced parking at most destinations. So transportation planners spend an awful lot of time working on automobile terminals. That's what a parking space is. It's your terminal. And we're not charging for most of those terminals. A huge, huge subsidy. Does anybody here have an idea what a typical urban parking space costs?
$30,000?
Yeah, well, to build, we used to say an urban parking space costs $10,000 to $20,000. 10 for surface, 20 for structured. Now we're saying $40,000 to $60,000. That's what if you're a developer and you're building a building and the zoning code says that you need to the zoning code says you need, let's say, 4 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet. That's a typical ratio. And it's a huge cost, but it gets embedded into the rent or the mortgage of that building, and it's invisible. Okay, so when you have this price structure, driving is very attractive. And now, one of the, Dan was describing the relative costs, the future costs of electric cars and how cheap they're going to be. And that's partly because with gasoline-powered cars, we do charge a special tax to help pay for roads, even though it only covers half the cost of the roadway system. But electric cars pay zero. So an electric vehicle is already getting subsidized at about 5 cents a mile for not having to pay for its roadway costs. And then another much larger amount. That parking space that I just described, most urban parking spaces are worth more than the car that parks there. And yet we give away that parking space. So I would argue that the better, and all this complaining about traffic congestion. How many of you have complained about traffic congestion in the last week? Raise your hands. Okay. How many of you would be willing to pay a toll to eliminate traffic congestion, to guarantee? Okay. Okay, well, great.
Okay, Todd, you've made your
I'm glad
point
to hear
here.
that. But I would argue it's a total mistake to say that the way to get people to drive less and rely more on walking and bicycling and public transit is to subsidize walking and bicycling and public transit more. No, the smart solution, the rational solution, is to reprice automobile travel. So, for example, when you're trying to decide how to get to your air park, that the air parks have zero free parking, and that encourages you to use that bike share bike.
I would comment from a political perspective, the reason why we aren't able to do any of those things is because people don't have any choice, except for if you're downtown. And so that's part of the opportunity here is creating choice. So what's more American than that? If you create choice, then you can do some of those things Todd's talking about. And I think that's part of our challenge, is to create more choice. Yes, over here.
I also want to thank each of you for your contributions. I am a new urbanist myself. I think everything you prescribe is important to follow through on. I think that the concept of regional skytrans is what it says, regional, meaning from city to city, from community to community, across the bay, that sort of thing. So with that idea, I wonder if you could consider regional sky transit as an addition to, rather than as a replacement for, everything you prescribe.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was suggesting, is it's creating choice. And I think I do share some of the skepticism about how big this is going to be or could be or should be, but I think we should be encouraging innovation and creating choices and letting it play out, as long as we price it appropriately, like Todd is arguing, and we'll see how that plays out. Alissa, do you want to add anything to that?
There's just a lot more information in LA in particular about how our housing costs are pricing people further and further out of the city. So my worry is, and then sprawl is its own challenge, to address, and it's not just something that it could be a solution for, but it's also something that we're trying to change and do more urban infill and build closer to existing transit networks. So I think you'd have to take that same perspective, like, Do you want to sit in a car for 90 minutes, which I know a lot of people that do that in LA, each way, not even just, your total day, like you're traveling more than an hour in the car or the train to get to work or from work. Do you replace that with a trip that's maybe easy and that maybe other people can't afford? Could you choose to move somewhere different in the city that wouldn't be as sustainable of a place to live as far as your housing impact on the environment? So there's a lot of trade-offs that concern me, but I don't think I think your point is exactly right. It's about having choices, and if we don't have choices, we drive. So if we can have choices, multiple choices, that can only be better than what we have now, the monoculture.
Yeah, we have to be clear. We've created this, very expensive transportation system, and it's not going to disappear. So we do have to figure out how to incrementally make it better. And so, yes, next.
I was able to structure my life from 1963 on to be a bicycle commuter, almost my entire life.
Thank you.
Yes, very hard to do, and I'm sure in different economic strata it's impossible to do. But my real question's for Mr. Sperling. 1/3 of your book has to do with pooling, and the only example you gave was where pooling does not work. That seemed to be a real disconnect, and how do you get people to pool? I don't know that that's a solution. Give me some more information.
Well, it's more like it's got to happen. It's almost like we don't have any choice. And you're right, we can continue having increasingly congested roads that are more difficult. It creates a lot of, like Alyssa's talking about, that's going, where people are driving 90 miles because they can't afford housing in San Francisco. But, and you're right, we could make it electric and, we solve some of the problems. But that's not a very desirable future. And, for me, I just can't imagine how we create a better transportation system that doesn't. Well, it does it in terms. So we do have the basis of it. Uber Pool, Lyft Line, Via, some of and Chariot are starting to provide those services. And if you talk to those companies, what's encouraging is all of them see that as their business model. They see that as the future of Lyft and Uber and Via is pooling. And they'll say that very directly. And because they look at it that they need to provide a more efficient service, they need to bring the price down, they need to make it more accessible. And so they're committed, as businesses, they're committed to it. So it's not swimming, on the business side, it's not swimming upstream. On the consumer side, it's definitely swimming upstream. There's no doubt about that. But I think there's a lot of us.
They probably do it in Canada, right?
What's that?
Well,
Good carpoolers.
Let me answer in the way I would recommend it or approach it. I must say I get very tired of people complaining about traffic congestion because we do have a solution, and that is a combination of efficient pricing and high-quality, space-efficient modes. So the road system has plenty of capacity if, in a typical urban area, let's say a third or half of the trips were made by public or shared vehicles, whether it's a government-supplied bus or Uber 10-person van. Those are so much more space efficient per passenger kilometer.
But Todd, those are not available now.
Exactly my point. So if people wanted to get beyond complaining, they wanted a solution, Dan and I could, Alissa, we could design a system where, and here's the crux of it, it takes somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes to assemble for you to walk from where you are to a bus stop and wait for a bus or an Uber, or under some scenarios, it's a demand response vehicle and it comes close to your house or whatever. But it adds 10 to 20 minutes per trip. Now, if everybody did that, we'd reduce the 10 or 20 minutes of traffic congestion per trip, and so actually the average person is saving time, but it's a tragedy of the commons. There is insufficient incentive for you, let's say for half of your trips across town, that you would make the effort to take the bus. And so that's where pricing becomes critical. To give traffic congestion maintains equilibrium. It gets bad enough, it discourages some peak period trips. So you either have traffic congestion or you have pricing. Choose. Pricing is more efficient because it allows you to choose how much you're willing to pay to save time, and it generates a revenue stream that can then be used. But to me, it doesn't matter whether it's Uber that's supplying the space, the shared trip, or a conventional bus. And conventional bus is actually much more cost effective because you've got 30 people. So there are, if you've got a high density corridor, I recommend that we don't count on the private companies, that we actually favor public transit. But until we have the combination of efficient pricing and bus lanes, HOV and bus lanes on surface streets, you're going to have traffic congestion.
And one of the only cities, you mentioned like all the cities that have seen decline in transit ridership. Seattle, I think, is a really good example of where they added dedicated bus lanes, they improved bus service, added frequency, and the employers have really been proactive in getting their own employees to organize their own carpools, like private carpools. And Seattle has seen its transit ridership, and I mean, I don't know if necessarily car usage has changed or ownership has changed, but transit ridership, for one, has really gone up because the buses move better when people aren't in their cars clogging up the roads in general. So buses, the ultimate pooling.
I am really struck by Todd's statement that the pocket air parks should have no parking spaces. And it made me think about a model. There was a NASA model done in which the vertiports were going to be efficiently placed inside the freeway cloverleafs. Well, this was going to bring masses of people into an already congested area and put them on freeways where there's a 43% uncertainty time. So the speed saved by air travel is evaporated as soon as they enter the freeway. Rather, I think as urban planners, maybe you want to consider air parks that are deliberately placed centrifugally out at the perimeter of the residential areas so that you never need a freeway to get to an air park. The only way to get to the air park is walking, biking, or golf cart because it's the farthest thing from the freeway for a community. And maybe this is telling us something about integrating these air parks not close to freeways, but rather well away from them on the urban greenbelt.
Brian, for clarification, I'm not suggesting zero parking. I'm suggesting zero free parking. And so it's okay, I think it's okay for somebody to drive as long as they're paying the full marginal cost of the parking. And so in this case, and when you do that, the demand for driving to that destination, parking there, tends to decline typically by 30%, and if you have the better options, by 50%. So what it does is it allows you, it's not saying nobody should drive anywhere, but it's testing the user demand. Do you really want to drive, or could you use alternatives? And then you only drive for those trips where it makes sense.
I'd go closer to the no parking and just have different kinds of services dropping people off there. So I'm even more, on this one I'm more radical than Todd. Next.
Hi, I wanted to thank you. All three of the presentations were excellent. There's one word that was missing from all three of them that I'm curious about, because I think it's more a solution than a problem, but the word convenience we've talked around it and about it, but we didn't ever say it once, even afterward. And I think it's, when we talk about parking or paying for parking, even paying for parking, my biggest frustration with that is the inconvenience of trying to figure out what time of the day they're charging or not charging, or whether I got a ticket because I wasn't sure, these kind of things. And so whatever type of transportation problem we're trying to solve, and there's kind of a unique one here as well that we talked about, either urban or not, that seems to be the thing that, for me, would hold me up. I noticed that in one of the slides of the presentation, and I'll cut it off here, I think it was the elderly with the chauffeurs, that the ridership went up the most. Clearly there's a need, there's an individual need, and the convenience or ability to drive wasn't there. So I was wondering if you could talk about that, like how that could be part of the solution in any of these strategies.
Yeah, I think that's, the way I pitch it in a very simple way is we want more passenger miles traveled, more mobility, but less vehicle use. And I think that's kind of a simple way of characterizing a more desirable future. And the convenience part of that is that, wouldn't you rather have a chauffeur? Wouldn't you rather have someone that takes care of all of your mobility needs? That
It's called a mom, actually, I think.
what's it, mom? Some of us weren't so lucky.
Jeff, I would be surprised if my slideshow didn't use the word convenience, because I very frequently use that. It's implied or it's embedded in the concept of the pricing. So inconvenience is a cost. It's you could say included in inconvenience are things like unreliability and uncomfortableness, and so the word inconvenience is implied, and I do use it frequently. That part of what we need to do, for example, to encourage public transit, is to make it very convenient, and similarly to price parking, we need to address the inconvenience that people like you face paying for parking.
I'll give an example just from, I think, what we talk about as far as...
I wanted to say thank you for that, because I was trying to figure out the financial costs versus other costs,
Right.
And so that helps to understand that it's one of the costs, is how you view that.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's these trip planners now that show you when you open up something like Google Maps, and it tells you how long it takes to get there, and that's not very good information quite often, because there's hidden costs in parking. There's usually time added because you're circling looking for parking, or don't know where to go for parking, or have to stand and figure out the sign for a while. And then there's benefits that we talk about, environmental, social, things like that. So there are some trip planners now where you can pick like sooner, cleaner, greener. You can pick how much active calories are you going to burn by getting around, and you can start to make better choices.
Sure. So earlier this month, I was part of a team that's putting together a research proposal, a request for money, and for an integrated mass app.
Yeah.
Somebody define mass.
Mobility as service, Todd.
Mobility as a service. Capital M, lowercase a, and then capital S. So mobility as a service is the cool new term for this convenience. So you have one app on your phone that not only tells you how many minutes it'll take to walk, and it gives you all the modes. Well, Google already does that. But it also allows you to schedule for those types of services that require scheduling. It allows you to schedule and order a ride sharing, and it integrates payment systems. And right now, if you want to you want to navigate, and you want to schedule, and you want to pay for, let's say, 5 different or 10 different services that happen to exist in your community, you've got 5 different apps, and some of them are contradictory. And so when we when we developed our proposal, what word did we use to describe the value of this? Convenience. That was the whole, we had a very complicated way to describe this, and then we collapsed it all down. We were going to say it's integrated and it's user-oriented. You ended up with a sentence of things, and then you collapse it down. What is it? Convenience.
Good. Next.
So this is more of an observation than a question. So this is my third Sustainable Aviation Symposium that I've attended, and I've noticed a distinct change. A lot of us here are pilots and engineers, and so we've all sort of drank the Kool-Aid. There's momentum that has been gained just in 3 short years. The fact that the Uber Elevate Summit, you have Uber, you have Airbus, you have Google, you have lots of big money being thrown at this. We have different concepts. We have the eVTOL, we have the eSTOL. We have lots of different ideas of how this stuff should be. We've sat here through, the, to me, mind-numbing equations of aerodynamicists. We talk about the batteries and the motors and the solar cells and all this stuff, and this is all so much a part of how we're gonna solve this problem technically. But what's fascinating about this year is that there are people like you guys here. How we're going to move this into our current infrastructure. We're looking at it on a whole nother level now. So talking with each one of you, in a way I'm like, oh wow, yeah, we have to figure out this and this. So it's not just about the flying car or urban mobility. It's about how we're gonna actually integrate it into our world. And to me, this is the most exciting thing because this means we're serious about making this happen. So I just want to thank you all for being here to sort of introduce this concept of how are we going to really make this work in the real world. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My question, excuse me, my question has to do with when you look at cities like Copenhagen, they don't have problems like this. Is it culture or is there more to it?
Oh, but they used to.
So
Take it away, Dan.
It is, it is very true. Well, partly the LA is where this car-centric culture and transportation system began, actually in the 1910, 1920, and it spread. So the European cities did come to it later, so they had that advantage. So the cities didn't get built up around the car like Silicon Valley and LA. But they've been much more aggressive. Having said that, they've been much more. So Copenhagen is a good example where I heard the former mayor talk, and he said that, we were very subtle about it. He says, we didn't ban cars. What we did is we just started shrinking the parking, very deliberately, but not in a high-profile way over time. And at the same time, built all the bike paths and built up the transit system. So it was in my little town of Davis, the city, it's a college town. Our market share for bicycles is about 35% of trips. And it didn't start that way. You go back in history, 1960s, they just started saying, well, wait a minute, how are we gonna, we're getting all this traffic, even in our little town, we're getting this traffic, and they very deliberately started building bike paths and then separate bike infrastructure. And I think the lesson here is that there has to be leadership in doing it. And I think the European cities had an advantage. They came later. They were built up already. But they, and it's something we don't have. We've gone all the way to the other extreme. So it's going to be a lot harder for us to.
Right, and LA planners made the conscious decision to spread out in the 1950s because there was a city center at the time, and they felt that was bad, and they decided to spread out mobility and such.
Yeah, well, a couple points. My experience is people are people all over the world, and it isn't so much a cultural difference, but people, it's partly institutional and partly just what people are familiar with. By the way, I think it was one of Dan's research papers that was published in Access magazine a while ago that compared Los Angeles's vehicle ownership and per capita travel with other cities.
Yeah, other cities.
And it's actually, Los Angeles now ranks average in terms of smart growth indices and others. Los Angeles is not inherently terrible, but it was the first.
Thank you.
It's not, okay, but here's
Okay,
what
Todd,
I do, okay, but here's the other point I want to make. The National Realtors Association every couple of years does a neighborhood preference survey. It asks people what kind of neighborhood they want to live in. And what's very interesting is the way they structure the survey. It doesn't just ask, do you like to live in single family or an apartment? It asks the respondents, would you rather live in a single family house if that requires you to drive everywhere and your commute is long, or would you accept attached housing, a townhouse or an apartment, if it allowed you to live in a walkable urban neighborhood with a shorter commute? And when this was first asked about 8 years ago, it was about a third of the respondents said, I'd choose the attached house in the walkable urban neighborhood. And that has crept up every time they do the survey. So now, this last year, it exceeded 50%. And what that shows is, it depends on how you ask the question, but if you ask the question correctly, it does turn out even people in the United States see the value, a high value of living in a walkable urban neighborhood. And most cities, most communities are doing some things, but very few of them are doing the real critical things, which are pricing, eliminating parking, and giving space-efficient modes an advantage.
So Alissa, in your talk, you said, you ended the talk saying that you're our customer.
Yes.
Which I loved. And as a show of hands here, I'd like you to raise your hand if you've participated in the design or construction of an airplane. Okay. So, can you give us some feedback on what your ideal user experience for urban air mobility or SkyTransit would look like?
Well, I'll tell you the frustration, I keep hitting this like mom thing home because there have been a lot of studies about why women in particular, stop biking as they get older, how moms are not able to take advantage of a lot of different transit options because very often you have to buy a car in many cities to get around, and I've resisted it very much in LA, but at a certain point, there were certain things that we could not achieve, and there was no car sharing system that was close enough to us to take advantage to it. And then you had to take the car seat to walk to your car sharing or have someone come, it's a disaster, And the ride sharing, I'll compare it to like something like Uber and Lyft. Like there is something called Uber Family in some major cities where they will bring you a car seat when they pick you up. They can only bring one car seat and they charge you $10 extra for the trip no matter where you're going, even if the trip is like a $2 trip. So that's not going to be an option for a lot of the people I know. And that's, I guess, the major thing that I would need to know is how do I get to the air park with my kids safely? Is it an awesome cargo bike or a neighborhood electric vehicle where I can put my kids safely? Are the streets going to be moving slow enough and have dedicated bike lanes for me to take my kids on those streets? And that's the bigger challenge I need all of your help with is as part of that Vision Zero thing, because for people to take a lot of these modes, especially in a city like LA, most of the moms I know would never put their kids on a bike and ride around in Los Angeles. I'm very careful. I try to pick good streets, but I'm still terrified most of the time when I do that. So what we need is that first mile, last mile that's family friendly and able to help me haul my stuff. And then how do we secure children in these vehicles? I'm sure it's not much different than being in a regular aircraft, but thoughts for a family of 4 going to a birthday party at the beach, for example. We've not made that trip several times because we're like, oh, that's just on a Saturday afternoon when that SIG alert pops up. That's just a disaster. We're not going to go. And I'd like to make that trip. So I think think of a family of 4 trying to go to Santa Monica Santa Monica's a bad example because we have rail that gets there, but trying to get to a birthday party in like Palos Verdes or something like that, which is, we would never want to go as much as we like that child.
Yeah, to bring it back to something Todd said, I think the ideal in the future will be we have a single portal, single app, that all the information and all the money flows through it, and it gives you all the choices, like Alyssa's, so the other half is creating the choice, of course. So it's creating the choices so that a lot of these choices are available, and the information comes to you easily. You just press a button, and everything is essentially taken care of. And this is all very real. The portal part of it is going to be a little more challenging in the U.S. because, who is going to do it? And, Todd, I think, was being, pretty optimistic. I can imagine it in Europe where you have strong transit agencies and local governments that could manage it. In the U.S., it's, maybe in Canada, it's a little more possible. Maybe LA Metro. But
Well, just because we got a room full of engineers, I'll give you a thing to think about. Would your life be better had a couple electrical engineers in, say, 1898 decided what kind of electrical plug should be global? Would that have simplified some of our lives and eliminated the need to bring these little devices around, converters? Or what
Never
if,
mind tell Apple to, stop
Right,
changing all that.
exactly. Well, I was going to get to that. Or another one is if somebody had translated between British English and, let's say, French in 1890 or so to decide which side of the road cars should drive on, and so you didn't have two totally different road systems. I mean, wouldn't it have been nice for us now if we had recognized path dependency and some two engineers had sat down and standardized stuff? Well, that's all that's needed. All it would require is a professional organization or a government agency saying, here's how the information should flow, that every person, every organization offering a particular class of services, transportation services, needs to deliver their schedule and route and payment system in a standard way.
And that includes Sky Transit, by the way,
Sure,
in case you're...
sure, absolutely.
Just put it in the app, Hyperloop.
That's
dude.
right.
Just throw
And
it in
those
there.
standards have been proposed for public
not
transit. It's just expanding them. The standards for the information of public transit and other things, they exist. It's just a matter of agreement.
Okay, so I think we're running out of time here.
Yeah, we had to change the metric first. Right.
Agreed.
Right, yeah.
We got some really...
Dan,
we'll put all these bright minds to work here.
Yeah.
We have
Dan, I think we could take two more questions. We've got the ballroom long enough.
Okay, 2 questions. Why don't you ask both of them and then we'll end it all.
Thank you very much for your presentations. I'd like to get your take on the following observation. It would appear to me, as a person who has lived in different cultural spheres, in Eastern Europe, and in the US, that there is a white elephant that hides behind the concept of convenience. Convenience often is defined as the price/hassle per effectivity of what I'm doing. It would appear to me that there is also a cultural element to this, in as much as how much are people prepared to interact with other people in order to get an effect. This sounds abstract, but it's quite clear. If you live in Kiev, you're used to living in a 60-person bus, smelling everyone's sweat in there, having pickpockets in the bus, because that's the way you get from A to B. If you're in Munich, you're used to paying about $3.50 per gallon in prohibitive taxes in order to incentivize you to park or not to park. If you're in the US, you've gotten used to the fact that I can hide in my car and I don't have to interact with anyone, and that is part of convenience. But it is not monetized convenience, it is cultural convenience. So I'd like to get your take on what needs to happen in order to make this kind of shared system feasible in the very first place.
Okay, and let's get this next question and then we'll...
Is we consider delivery of people by some form of air mobility. If the panel could talk about what's a common sense planning approach to this, and it enters into Dr. Roxas's work as well. Some would say, let's deliver them to the top of tall buildings and take them down by elevator, and they find their way. Some would say, why not waterfront, whether it's unused pier, we've seen unused ships, green fields, whatever. We have to find a place to deliver people to for this to be feasible and to work. What do you folks think would be your preference?
Okay, so we've got the two questions about the convenience and history, and this one about the location. So,
Okay, yeah, you go. Yeah, you go the first one first.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay, concerning how the cultural factor, how cultural. My experience, and I work internationally, is that people are basically people and will respond to incentives pretty much everywhere. Almost everybody prefers, or almost everybody dislikes too much crowding, but most people will accept riding on a bus if you're guaranteed a seat. In fact, that's what an airplane does, and wealthy people fly in airplanes. No, but I agree with you entirely that we need to fire a bunch of engineers and hire a bunch of marketing professionals. We need to channel Don Draper as our hero, because we need, if you're interested in changing behavior, you need to think about what is the experience like to travel. People will change a lot if you can find the incentives and position. For example, position. In my work, I work a lot trying to figure out how to get people to drive less and rely more on walking, bicycling, and public transit. And there are ways that you can position those in people's minds as the preferred elite way to get around. And there's plenty of examples of people who prefer to live in wealthy people, affluent people who have alternatives, who prefer to live in walkable communities or bicycle to work. Or you could think of public transit as in a lot of European and Asian places as the superior way to get around. But we just have to think about it from the user's perspective, understand what motivates people and respond to that. That's what marketing really is all about.
And to answer the other question, it's kind of like the two opposite sides. So we want more people to be in closer quarters together, but then our vehicles maybe can only, these airborne vehicles can only have put 4 people in them. So we're going to have, now are we going to have like public transit sized elevators to get people down these buildings together? Are you going to be waiting in traffic to get in your, aircraft that's going to take you across the city? So maybe there'll be these other types of experiences. When I was watching the Uber conference earlier this week, I was like, I hope there's some like elevator manufacturer or engineer at this place trying to figure out how to move people up and down through buildings, because that's been the one limiter as far as the height of our buildings and how many people we can put in our urban environments. We've now had all these breakthroughs in elevator technology, but are we going to be able to, the biggest problem in transit is elevators are broken to get people down to subways, and that's a huge accessibility issue. You go to board your aircraft with your father who is elderly and cannot walk any longer, and sorry, Dad, and you can't get up in the elevator, or you have to wait a long time to get up in the elevator.
Catapults.
Yeah.
I think we need catapults.
Catapults for
on the
seniors. That's
sidewalks.
perfect. Yeah.
It just throws you
That's
up.
great. But it's again, these idea of bottlenecks, which comes, it's to get an Elon Musk car sewer. That's one problem, to get, it's all these different, you're always gonna have these bottlenecks. And how do we make sure people have, again, maybe multiple options of getting, the access to these aircrafts? And that's why I love the park idea, because it creates this public space for a city. People can get there and are used to getting to those types of places in non-car ways, and it hopefully won't disrupt our lives, in the ways that people are worried about it. So,
thank you all. Been a great experience, I know, for the 3 of us, and I'm glad others thought the same way. So thank you all. Let's have a hand for this panel.